The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's quiet streets as 12-year-old twin sisters Emma and Sarah Martinez walked their golden retriever, Max, toward the old stone bridge that connected their small town to the county road. It was a Saturday in late October, and the crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant smell of wood smoke from chimneys just beginning to warm homes for the coming winter. Emma, the more adventurous of the twins, tugged gently on Max's leash as they approached the bridge. "Come on, boy, let's go see if the fish are jumping today," she called to the enthusiastic dog whose tail wagged with the promise of adventure. Sarah, always the more cautious sister, followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with quiet observation. The bridge had stood for nearly a century, its weathered stone pillars rising 30 feet above Willow Creek below. Local children had walked across it countless times and their parents before them, creating generations of memories along its worn pathway. The railings, made of wrought iron painted green many years ago, now showed patches of rust that gave the structure character and told stories of harsh winters and scorching summers. As the girls approached the center of the bridge, Max suddenly stopped walking. His ears perked up, and he tilted his head in the way dogs do when they hear something humans cannot. Emma tried to coax him forward, but the usually obedient retriever planted his feet firmly on the bridge's stone surface and began to whine softly. "What's wrong with him?" Sarah asked, kneeling down to pet Max's golden fur. The dog's body trembled slightly, and his dark eyes seemed focused on something beyond the bridge's railing. Emma followed Max's gaze and noticed that he was staring intently at the area beneath the bridge, where the creek curved sharply to the left. "Maybe he smells a raccoon or something," Emma suggested. But even as she spoke, she felt an unusual tension in the air. Max was not typically bothered by small woodland creatures. In fact, he usually ignored them completely, more interested in chasing tennis balls than wildlife. Sarah stood up and walked to the railing, peering over the edge toward the creek below. The water level was lower than usual due to the dry autumn, exposing more of the rocky creek bed than she had ever seen before. Fallen tree branches and debris that had washed downstream during spring floods now lay scattered along the banks like nature's forgotten toys. "Emma, look at this," Sarah called softly, her voice carrying a note of concern. Emma joined her sister at the railing, and together they gazed down at the scene below. At first everything appeared normal, just rocks, water, and the usual collection of branches and leaves that autumn brings to every creek. But Max's behavior grew more agitated. The golden retriever began pacing back and forth across the width of the bridge, whimpering and occasionally letting out a short, sharp bark that echoed off the stone walls beneath them. His distress was becoming more obvious with each passing moment, and both girls recognized that their beloved pet was trying to communicate something important. "We should probably head back," Sarah suggested, glancing at her watch. Their mother had asked them to return home by 10 o'clock to help with weekend chores, and it was already 9:30. But Emma felt drawn to understand what was troubling Max so deeply. "Just a few more minutes," Emma replied, walking to the opposite side of the bridge to get a different angle of view into the creek bed. From this position, she could see further upstream, where the water curved around a large boulder that had probably tumbled down from the hillside decades ago. Max followed Emma to the new vantage point, and his agitation increased dramatically. He began pawing at the bridge's stone surface and looking up at Emma with an expression that seemed almost human in its urgency. The dog's behavior was so unusual that both girls forgot about their mother's instructions and focused entirely on understanding what Max was trying to tell them. The golden retriever suddenly broke away from Emma's loose grip on his leash and ran to the far end of the bridge. Once there, he began running back and forth between the bridge's entrance and the spot where the girls stood, barking continuously. His message was becoming clearer. He wanted them to follow him somewhere, and he wanted them to do it immediately. "He's never acted like this before," Sarah observed, watching Max's increasingly frantic behavior. The dog's golden coat gleamed in the morning sunlight, but his usual playful demeanor had been replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. Emma made a decision that would change their quiet Saturday morning forever. "Let's follow him," she announced, gathering up Max's leash. "He's trying to show us something important." The twins followed Max as he led them off the bridge and down a steep, narrow path that wound between thick bushes and young trees. The path was barely visible, probably created by deer or other animals seeking access to the creek for drinking water. Thorny branches caught at their clothing and loose rocks shifted beneath their feet. But Max moved with purpose and determination down the treacherous slope. As they descended toward the creek level, the sound of running water grew louder, and the air became cooler and more humid. Emma and Sarah had explored many areas around their town, but they had never ventured down to this particular section of Willow Creek. The terrain was more rugged than they had expected, with large boulders and fallen logs creating natural obstacles that required careful navigation. Max reached the bottom of the path and immediately began running along the creek bank toward the area directly beneath the bridge. His barking had stopped, but his body language still conveyed extreme urgency. The twins hurried to keep up with him, their sneakers crunching on the carpet of fallen leaves that covered the uneven ground. When they finally caught up to Max, the golden retriever was standing perfectly still beside a large pile of debris that had accumulated against one of the bridge's stone supports. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than the usual collection of branches, leaves, and trash that gathered in such places after storms and floods. But as Emma and Sarah looked more closely, they realized that Max had led them to something that would test their courage, challenge their assumptions about their quiet town, and ultimately reveal the true heroic nature that existed within both their beloved pet and themselves. The pile of debris was not what it appeared to be, and the discovery they were about to make would transform them from ordinary 12-year-old girls into local heroes, whose actions would be remembered by their community for generations to come. Sarah was the first to notice that something was terribly wrong with the pile of debris beside the bridge support. What she had initially mistaken for a fallen branch was actually a human arm. Motionless and partially covered by wet leaves and muddy water, her heart began racing as the reality of the situation became clear. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the creek, "look more carefully at that pile." Emma followed her sister's pointing finger and felt her stomach lurch when she realized what they were seeing. Partially hidden beneath branches, leaves, and other debris was a person, lying face down and completely still in the shallow water at the base of the bridge support. Max stood guard beside the figure, no longer barking but maintaining his alert posture. His golden fur was wet from wading into the creek, and his dark eyes moved constantly between the unconscious person and the two girls, as if asking them to take action. Is he dead?" Emma asked, her voice shaking with fear and uncertainty. Neither girl had ever encountered anything like this situation, and they felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of making decisions that could affect someone's life. Sarah forced herself to move closer, stepping carefully on the slippery rocks. As she approached, she could see that the person was wearing a uniform, a brown shirt with patches and badges that she recognized as belonging to the county sheriff's department. The man's hat had fallen off and was floating several feet away in the creek, caught against a small dam of accumulated sticks and leaves. "It's Sheriff Davidson," Sarah announced, recognizing the gray-haired man who had visited their school multiple times to talk about safety and community service. Sheriff Robert Davidson was well known throughout the county as a fair and dedicated law enforcement officer who had served the community for over 25 years. Emma waded into the creek beside her sister, the cold water immediately soaking through her sneakers and socks. Together, the twins could see that Sheriff Davidson was breathing, but barely. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and there was a significant amount of blood on the back of his head, creating a dark stain that mixed with the creek water around him. "We have to do something," Emma declared, but she had no idea what that something should be. They had learned basic first aid in school, but those lessons had covered simple cuts and bruises, not situations involving serious injuries and unconscious adults. Max seemed to understand the urgency of the situation better than anyone. The golden retriever carefully positioned himself beside Sheriff Davidson's head, creating a living pillow that kept the injured man's face above the water level. Without Max's instinctive action, the sheriff might have drowned in just a few inches of creek water. "We need to call for help," Sarah said, reaching for her cell phone. But when she looked at the screen, she saw what she had feared. No signal. The bridge area had always been a dead zone for cellular service, surrounded as it was by hills and thick forest that blocked radio waves. "One of us has to run back to town," Emma realized, looking up the steep path they had descended just minutes earlier. The nearest house was at least a half-mile away, and reaching it would require climbing back up to the bridge level and then running along the main road. But leaving Sheriff Davidson alone in his current condition seemed impossible. His breathing remained labored, and the twins could see that he was losing blood from his head wound. Every minute that passed without proper medical attention could be the difference between life and death. "I'll go," Sarah announced, already turning toward the path. As the faster runner of the two sisters, she knew she could make better time getting back to town. "You stay here with Max and keep Sheriff Davidson's head above water." Emma felt a wave of fear wash over her as she contemplated being left alone with the seriously injured sheriff. But she knew her sister was right. Someone had to stay and someone had to go for help. There was no other choice. "Run as fast as you can," Emma called as Sarah began scrambling up the steep path. "Go to Miller's Hardware first. Mr. Miller always opens early on Saturdays, and he has a landline phone." Sarah disappeared into the thick vegetation above, and Emma could hear her footsteps and the sound of breaking branches as she climbed toward the bridge. Soon even those sounds faded away, leaving Emma alone with Max and the unconscious sheriff in the quiet creek bed. Emma positioned herself beside Max, both of them working together to keep Sheriff Davidson stable. She had never felt so young and helpless in her life, but she forced herself to remember everything she had learned about first aid and emergency situations. She checked the sheriff's pulse by placing 2 fingers on his wrist, the way her health teacher had demonstrated. His heartbeat was present but weak, and his skin felt cold and clammy to her touch. She knew these were signs of shock, a serious condition that required immediate medical attention. Max remained perfectly still, allowing Sheriff Davidson's head to rest against his warm, dry fur. The dog's presence provided not only physical support for the injured man, but also emotional comfort for Emma, who felt less alone knowing that her faithful companion was sharing this frightening responsibility. As minutes passed, Emma began talking to Sheriff Davidson, hoping that the sound of her voice might help keep him conscious or at least provide some comfort. She told him about school, about her and Sarah's plans for Halloween, about Max's latest tricks, about anything she could think of that might reach through his unconscious state. "Help is coming," she assured him repeatedly, though she had no way of knowing how long it would take Sarah to reach town. "Contact emergency services and guide rescuers back to their location." The bridge was not easily accessible to ambulances, and she worried that paramedics might have difficulty reaching the creek bed with their equipment. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, but the temperature remained cool and Emma began to worry about hypothermia. Sheriff Davidson's clothes were soaked through, and lying in the cold creek water for an extended period could cause his body temperature to drop dangerously low. She looked around the immediate area and spotted Sheriff Davidson's jacket, which had apparently been torn off during whatever accident had brought him to this location. The jacket was caught on a branch about 10 feet upstream, and Emma carefully waded through the creek to retrieve it. The heavy, waterproof jacket was still relatively dry on the inside, and Emma used it to cover as much of Sheriff Davidson's body as possible, while still allowing Max to support his head. The extra layer of protection would help preserve his body heat and potentially buy more time for rescue workers to arrive. As she worked to make Sheriff Davidson more comfortable, Emma began to wonder how he had ended up in the creek bed beneath the bridge. There were no obvious signs of a car accident, and the sheriff's patrol vehicle was nowhere to be seen. The mystery of what had happened would have to wait for answers, but Emma was determined to do everything in her power to make sure Sheriff Davidson survived to provide those answers himself. Sarah's legs burned as she raced up the steep path from the creek bed, her heart pounding from both physical exertion and pure adrenaline. Branches scratched at her arms and face, but she pushed through the thick vegetation with determination, knowing that Sheriff Davidson's life might depend on how quickly she could reach help. When she finally reached the bridge level, Sarah paused for just a moment to catch her breath and get her bearings. The morning air felt thin in her lungs, and she could taste the metallic flavor of fear and exhaustion on her tongue. Looking back down toward the creek, she could barely see Emma and Max through the dense foliage, but she knew they were still there, keeping the injured sheriff alive. Sarah sprinted across the bridge and down the main road toward town, her sneakers slapping against the asphalt in a steady rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The road stretched ahead of her like a ribbon, and she focused on the distant buildings of Millbrook, willing herself to run faster than she had ever run before. Miller's hardware store sat on the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue, its familiar red and white sign a welcome sight as Sarah rounded the final curve. True to Emma's prediction, Mr. Miller was already opening his store for the day, propping the front door open and arranging displays of seasonal items on the sidewalk. "Mr. Miller," Sarah called out as she approached, her voice cracked and breathless from running. "I need to use your phone." "It's an emergency." Thomas Miller, a kind man in his 60s who had known the Martinez family for years, immediately recognized the urgency in Sarah's voice and expression. Without asking questions, he ushered her into the store and pointed toward the old rotary phone that sat on the counter behind the cash register. "What's the number for 911? Sarah asked, her hands shaking as she reached for the phone. In her panic, she had momentarily forgotten something she had known since childhood. "Just dial 911. "Sweetheart," Mr. Miller said gently, already moving to lock the front door and flip the sign to closed. He understood that whatever was happening required his full attention and privacy. Sarah dialed the 3 numbers and waited for what felt like an eternity before a calm voice answered. 911 Emergency Services, what is your emergency? "This is Sarah Martinez," she began, forcing herself to speak as clearly as possible despite her breathlessness. "We found Sheriff Davidson unconscious under the old Stone Bridge on County Road 15. He's badly hurt and needs an ambulance right away." The dispatcher's voice became immediately more focused and professional. "Can you confirm the location, Sarah? You said County Road 15 at the Stone Bridge?" "Yes, but he's not on the bridge," Sarah explained, realizing that she needed to provide more specific information. "He's down in the creek bed underneath the bridge. My sister Emma is with him now, and our dog found him. He's breathing, but he's unconscious and there's blood on his head." "Okay, Sarah, you're doing great," the dispatcher assured her. "I'm sending paramedics and additional officers to your location right now. Can you tell me how to access the creek bed area where Sheriff Davidson is located?" Sarah described the steep path they had followed down from the bridge, emphasizing how difficult it would be for emergency workers to carry equipment down to the creek level. She also mentioned that there was no cell phone service in the area, so the responders would need to be prepared to work without radio communication once they descended to the creek bed. "Is Sheriff Davidson conscious at all?" the dispatcher asked. "Can he respond to voices or touch?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I ran for help as soon as we found him. My sister Emma stayed with him, and our dog Max is helping keep his head out of the water." The dispatcher continued asking questions about Sheriff Davidson's condition and the exact location, while simultaneously coordinating the emergency response through her radio system. Sarah could hear her communicating with paramedics, additional law enforcement officers, and even the fire department, whose rescue equipment might be needed to safely transport an injured person from the difficult terrain. Mr. Miller brought Sarah a glass of water and a chair, recognizing that the young girl was in shock from her traumatic discovery and her desperate run for help. "You did exactly the right thing, Sarah," he told her kindly. "Sheriff Davidson is lucky that you and Emma were there this morning." Through the store's front window, Sarah could already see the first emergency vehicle approaching, its red and blue lights flashing and siren wailing. The sight brought her both relief and renewed anxiety. Help was coming, but she still didn't know if it would arrive in time to save Sheriff Davidson's life. The dispatcher kept Sarah on the line, using her as a communication link to coordinate the rescue effort. "Sarah, I need you to stay on the phone and help guide the paramedics to the exact location."
"Can you do that?"
"Yes," Sarah replied, though she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. She had never imagined that a simple Saturday morning walk with Max would lead to such a serious situation. Deputy Maria Santos was the first to arrive, pulling up in front of Miller's Hardware in her patrol car. Sarah recognized her immediately. Deputy Santos had also visited their school and was known throughout the community as a competent and caring officer. "Sarah Martinez?" Deputy Santos asked as she entered the store. "I understand you found Sheriff Davidson?" Sarah nodded and began explaining the situation once again, this time providing even more detail about the condition they had found the sheriff in and the actions that Emma and Max were taking to keep him stable. Deputy Santos listened carefully, asking specific questions about the scene and taking notes that she would relay to the paramedics. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, followed by a fire truck equipped with rescue gear. The small hardware store became an impromptu command center as emergency responders gathered information and planned their approach to reaching the injured sheriff. Paramedic James Crawford, a veteran emergency medical technician with 15 years of experience, took charge of the medical response. "How long has it been since you found Sheriff Davidson?" he asked Sarah. Sarah looked at Mr. Miller's clock and realized with shock that nearly 30 minutes had passed since she had left Emma alone with the sheriff. Time seemed to have moved both incredibly slowly and impossibly fast during her race for help. "About 30 minutes, she answered, feeling guilty about the delay. "Is that too long?" "Every minute matters in a situation like this," Paramedic Crawford replied honestly. "But 30 minutes is not necessarily too late if your sister has been keeping him stable. You and Emma may have saved his life by finding him when you did." The emergency responders quickly organized their approach, with Deputy Santos leading the way to show them the exact location of the bridge and the path down to the creek bed. Sarah insisted on accompanying them, knowing that Emma would need to see a familiar face and that she could provide the most accurate information about Sheriff Davidson's condition. As they drove toward the bridge in a convoy of emergency vehicles, Sarah found herself praying harder than she ever had before, hoping that they would arrive in time and that Emma had been able to keep Sheriff Davidson alive during the long, frightening minutes she had spent alone with him in the creek bed. Emma had never felt time move so slowly as during the 30 minutes she spent alone with Sheriff Davidson and Max beside the creek. Every few minutes she checked the sheriff's pulse and breathing, relieved each time to find that both were still present, though weak. Max remained perfectly still, serving as a living pillow for the injured man's head, occasionally shifting his position slightly to maintain comfort but never abandoning his post. The sound of distant sirens gradually grew louder, and Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her when she realized that Sarah had successfully reached help. The sirens seemed to be coming from multiple vehicles, which meant that serious help was on the way. She began talking to Sheriff Davidson more urgently, hoping that the approaching rescue might somehow reach his consciousness. "Do you hear that, Sheriff Davidson?" she said softly, adjusting his jacket to make sure he stayed as warm as possible. "Help is coming. Sarah made it to town and the paramedics are here now. You're going to be okay." Max's ears perked up at the sound of voices calling from above. Emma could hear people shouting her name and asking for responses, but the thick vegetation and the distance from the bridge made clear communication impossible. She decided to use the loudest voice she could manage. "Down here," Emma called upward toward the bridge. "We're directly under the bridge by the stone support." The voices became more organized, and Emma could tell that several people were making their way down the steep path that she and Sarah had descended earlier. The sound of breaking branches and shifting rocks indicated that the rescue team was having the same difficulties with the treacherous terrain that the girls had experienced. Deputy Santos appeared first through the thick bushes, followed closely by two paramedics carrying medical equipment in waterproof bags. Emma had never been so happy to see adults taking charge of a situation that had felt far too big for a 12-year-old to handle alone. "Emma, you did a wonderful job," Deputy Santos said immediately, kneeling down beside the injured sheriff to assess his condition. "How has he been while Sarah was getting help?" "His breathing has been steady but weak," Emma reported, trying to remember all the details that might be important. "I checked his pulse several times and it's been there but not very strong. Max has been keeping his head up out of the water the whole time." Paramedic Crawford carefully examined Sheriff Davidson while his partner, Paramedic Linda Chen, set up medical equipment on the rocky creek bank. They worked with quiet efficiency, checking vital signs, examining the head wound, and preparing emergency treatments. "His pulse is thready and his blood pressure is low," Paramedic Crawford reported to his partner. "Possible concussion, definitely shock, and we need to be concerned about hypothermia." "How long was he in the water before you found him?" Emma realized that she didn't know the answer to that crucial question. "We don't know," she admitted. "Max led us down here around 9:30 this morning. But we don't know how long Sheriff Davidson had been here before that." More rescue workers arrived at the creek bed, including firefighters with specialized rescue equipment and additional medical personnel. The small area beneath the bridge became crowded with people working to save Sheriff Davidson's life. But they moved with practiced coordination that showed their experience with emergency situations. "We need to get him out of this water immediately," Paramedic Chen announced, unwrapping a specialized stretcher designed for water rescues. "His core temperature is dropping and we need to start warming him up while we stabilize him for transport." The rescue team worked together to carefully lift Sheriff Davidson from the creek onto the stretcher, taking great care to protect his neck and spine in case he had suffered additional injuries during whatever accident had brought him to this location. Max finally stepped away from his post, his golden fur soaked and muddy, but his tail wagging slightly as he seemed to understand that human help had arrived. Emma watched in fascination as the paramedics began their work. They wrapped Sheriff Davidson in warming blankets, started an intravenous line to provide fluids and medications, and attached monitoring equipment to track his vital signs. Despite the difficult conditions, they worked with the same precision and care that they would have shown in a hospital emergency room. "How are we going to get him up to the bridge level?" Emma asked, looking up at the steep path that had been challenging enough for her and Sarah to navigate without carrying anything. Fire Captain Rodriguez, who had been assessing the logistics of the rescue, had already developed a plan. "We're going to use a rope and pulley system," he explained. "Some of my crew are setting up anchoring points on the bridge right now. We'll be able to lift the stretcher straight up instead of trying to carry it up that path." The complexity of the rescue operation impressed Emma, and she began to understand why so many different emergency services had responded to Sarah's call. Each team brought specialized skills and equipment that were necessary for different aspects of saving Sheriff Davidson's life and getting him safely to a hospital. Sarah appeared at the top of the path, accompanied by more rescue workers who were bringing additional equipment down to the creek bed. The reunion between the twin sisters was brief but emotional, with both girls feeling relieved that they were no longer facing this crisis alone. "How did you find him so quickly?" Deputy Santos asked, genuinely curious about how two young girls had discovered Sheriff Davidson in such an obscure location. "This isn't exactly a place where people usually walk." Emma and Sarah explained about Max's unusual behavior on the bridge and how their dog had led them down to the creek bed. As they told the story, several of the rescue workers looked at Max with new respect, realizing that the golden retriever had essentially saved Sheriff Davidson's life by alerting the girls to his presence. "That dog should get a medal," Paramedic Crawford said, pausing in his work to pat Max's head. "If you girls hadn't found the sheriff when you did, and if Max hadn't kept his head out of the water, we'd probably be dealing with a very different situation right now." The rope and pulley system was ready, and the rescue team prepared to lift Sheriff Davidson up to the bridge level, where an ambulance waited to transport him to the county hospital. The stretcher was securely attached to the ropes, and firefighters positioned themselves both above and below to guide the ascent. "Emma, Sarah, you should go up first," Captain Rodriguez instructed. "We want you out of the way before we start moving the stretcher, and your parents are probably worried sick about you by now." The girls realized that in all the excitement and fear of the morning, they had completely forgotten about their parents' instructions to return home by 10 o'clock. It was now nearly 11, and their mother would indeed be worried about their absence. As Emma and Sarah climbed up the path ahead of the rescue team, they could see the bridge area bustling with emergency vehicles and personnel. Their quiet Saturday morning walk had turned into the biggest emergency response Millbrook had seen in years, and they were at the center of it all. The sight of so many people working together to save Sheriff Davidson's life filled both girls with a mixture of pride and humility. They had done something important by finding him and keeping him alive, but they also understood that many other people with much greater skills and experience were now taking over the responsibility of saving his life. The scene on the bridge looked like something from a movie as Emma and Sarah emerged from the path leading up from the creek bed. Emergency vehicles lined the narrow county road, their red and blue lights creating a kaleidoscope of colors against the morning sky. Ambulance crews, firefighters, sheriff's deputies, and even state police officers worked together with remarkable coordination, each person focused on their specific role in the rescue operation. Maria Martinez, the twins' mother, stood near Deputy Santos's patrol car, her face etched with worry and confusion. When she spotted Emma and Sarah climbing up from the creek area, she rushed toward them with tears of relief in her eyes. "Emma, Sarah, thank God you're safe," she exclaimed, pulling both girls into a fierce embrace. "Mrs. Henderson called me when she saw all the emergency vehicles heading toward the bridge. I was terrified something had happened to you." The girls quickly explained the morning's events to their mother, who listened with growing amazement and pride. Like the rescue workers, Maria Martinez was struck by the courage her daughters had shown and the crucial role that Max had played in saving Sheriff Davidson's life. You did exactly the right things, their mother assured them, though Emma could see the fear in her eyes as she imagined what could have happened if the situation had turned out differently. I'm so proud of both of you, and I'm grateful that you're safe. The rope and pulley rescue operation began, with Sheriff Davidson's stretcher being slowly and carefully lifted from the creek bed to the bridge level. Everyone on the bridge watched in tense silence as the stretcher rose, swaying slightly in the morning breeze but securely held by the professional rescue system. Dr. Patricia Williams, the county's emergency medical director, had arrived on the scene and was coordinating with the paramedics by radio to ensure that Sheriff Davidson received the most appropriate treatment during transport. As the stretcher reached the bridge level, she immediately began a more thorough medical assessment. His vital signs have stabilized somewhat during the warming process, Dr. Williams reported to the waiting ambulance crew, but he's still in critical condition. We need to get him to the trauma center immediately. The transfer from rescue stretcher to ambulance gurney happened quickly but carefully, with medical personnel maintaining constant monitoring of Sheriff Davidson's condition. Emma and Sarah watched as the man they had found barely alive was loaded into the ambulance, surrounded by sophisticated medical equipment and attended by experienced paramedics. Will he be okay? Emma asked Dr. Williams, who was preparing to accompany Sheriff Davidson in the ambulance for continued medical care during transport. You girls found him just in time, the doctor replied honestly. He has a serious head injury and he's been through a lot, but his chances are much better because of what you and Max did this morning. Sometimes the difference between life and death comes down to being in the right place at the right time, with the courage to act. As the ambulance departed for the hospital, its sirens wailing and lights flashing, the remaining emergency personnel began the process of investigating how Sheriff Davidson had ended up in the creek bed beneath the bridge. Deputy Santos took detailed statements from Emma and Sarah, documenting exactly how they had found the sheriff and what condition he had been in. Captain Rodriguez led a team of investigators down to the creek bed to examine the scene more thoroughly. They were looking for clues that might explain whether Sheriff Davidson had fallen from the bridge, been injured elsewhere and somehow ended up in the creek, or encountered some other type of accident. We found his patrol car, Deputy Santos reported over her radio to the investigators below. It's parked on the far side of the bridge, properly positioned as if he had stopped to investigate something. No signs of damage or struggle around the vehicle. The mystery of what had happened to Sheriff Davidson was beginning to unfold, but the most important thing was that he was alive and receiving medical care. The investigation could continue later, but the rescue mission had been completed successfully thanks to the quick thinking and bravery of two 12-year-old girls and their remarkable dog. News of the rescue spread quickly through Millbrook, a small town where significant events rarely occurred and neighbors still knew each other by name. By noon, representatives from the local newspaper had arrived on the scene, eager to document the story of how twin girls and their dog had saved the life of the county's beloved sheriff. Jennifer Walsh, a reporter for the Millbrook Gazette, interviewed Emma and Sarah while they waited for their father to pick them up from the bridge area. The girls were still processing the morning's events and felt somewhat overwhelmed by the attention their actions were receiving. We just did what anyone would do, Sarah insisted, uncomfortable with being called a hero. Max was the one who really found Sheriff Davidson. We just followed him and then called for help. Emma nodded in agreement with her sister. Max knew something was wrong before we did. He's the real hero in this story. The reporter was particularly interested in Max's behavior and the way the golden retriever had led the girls to Sheriff Davidson's location. Animal behaviorists had long documented the ability of dogs to sense things that humans cannot detect. But Max's actions represented an extraordinary example of canine intuition and loyalty. Has Max ever behaved this way before? Jennifer Walsh asked, kneeling down to pet the golden retriever, who seemed to enjoy the attention but appeared tired from his morning adventure. Never, Emma replied. He's always been a good dog, but this morning was completely different. It was like he knew Sheriff Davidson needed help and he wasn't going to give up until we found him. Dr. Robert Kim, the county veterinarian, had heard about Max's role in the rescue and stopped by the bridge to examine the dog and offer his professional perspective on the animal's behavior. After a thorough examination, he pronounced Max to be in excellent health and spirits, with no apparent ill effects from his time in the cold creek water. Dogs have senses that we don't fully understand, Dr. Kim explained to the gathered crowd of emergency personnel and reporters. They can detect scents, sounds, and even changes in the environment that are completely undetectable to humans. Max probably knew someone was in distress long before Emma and Sarah could see any obvious signs. The veterinarian's explanation helped everyone understand why Max had been so agitated on the bridge and why he had refused to continue their normal walk. The golden retriever had essentially used his superior senses to detect a life-threatening emergency that no human would have discovered without his guidance. As the afternoon progressed, more details about Sheriff Davidson's condition became available from the hospital. Dr. Williams called Deputy Santos with an update that brought relief to everyone who had participated in the rescue operation. Sheriff Davidson is conscious and stable, she reported. He has a significant concussion and some memory loss about recent events, but his vital signs are strong and there's no evidence of permanent brain damage. The medical team believes he fell from the bridge while investigating something, possibly during the early morning hours. The news that Sheriff Davidson would survive and likely make a full recovery spread quickly through the crowd of emergency personnel still gathered at the bridge. There were smiles and handshakes all around as people who had worked together under pressure celebrated the successful outcome of their efforts. Emma and Sarah felt a tremendous weight lift from their shoulders when they learned that Sheriff Davidson was going to be okay. The fear that had gripped them all morning, the fear that they might not have acted quickly enough or done the right things, finally began to fade as they realized their actions had indeed saved a life. You girls should be very proud, Captain Rodriguez told them as emergency crews began packing up their equipment. Professional rescue workers train for years to handle situations like this, and you handled it perfectly under incredibly difficult circumstances. The twins' father, Carlos Martinez, arrived just as the last emergency vehicles were preparing to leave. He had rushed to the bridge as soon as he received his wife's phone call, and his relief at finding his daughter safe was evident in his embrace and the tears in his eyes. "Your mother told me what happened," he said, looking at Emma and Sarah with a mixture of pride and amazement. "I can't believe how brave you were and how smart you were to get help so quickly." As the Martinez family prepared to leave the bridge and return home, they were approached by several community members who had heard about the rescue and wanted to express their gratitude. Sheriff Davidson was respected and loved throughout the county, and many people felt personally grateful to Emma, Sarah, and Max for saving his life. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, an elderly woman who lived near the bridge, had brought homemade cookies for the girls and a special treat for Max. "Sheriff Davidson helped my grandson when he got into trouble a few years ago," she explained. "He's a good man who cares about this community, and I'm so thankful you girls found him in time." The genuine appreciation from community members helped Emma and Sarah understand that their actions had impact far beyond just saving one person's life. Sheriff Davidson was woven into the fabric of their small town, and his loss would have affected many families and individuals. 3 weeks after the rescue, Sheriff Davidson was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health and a story that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Although he had no memory of falling from the bridge or the hours he spent unconscious in the creek bed, he vividly remembered waking up in the hospital and learning that 2 young girls and their dog had saved his life. The investigation into his accident had revealed that Sheriff Davidson had stopped on the bridge during his early morning patrol to investigate what appeared to be suspicious activity in the area. While examining the bridge railing for signs of vandalism, he had apparently lost his footing on the wet stone surface and fallen 30 feet into the creek below. The fall had occurred around 4 a.m, which meant he had been lying unconscious in the cold water for over 5 hours before Emma, Sarah, and Max found him. Dr. Williams later confirmed that Sheriff Davidson would not have survived much longer in those conditions. Hypothermia and shock were already threatening his life when the girls discovered him, and another hour or 2 of exposure could have been fatal. The timing of their morning walk had indeed been the difference between life and death. The town of Millbrook decided to honor Emma, Sarah, and Max with a special ceremony at the monthly town council meeting. Mayor Robert Chen had proclaimed them heroes of Millbrook and commissioned a local artist to create a plaque that would be permanently displayed at the bridge where the rescue had taken place. On the evening of the ceremony, The Millbrook Community Center was packed with residents who wanted to show their appreciation for the twins and their remarkable dog. Sheriff Davidson, still wearing a small bandage on his head but otherwise looking healthy and strong, was given the honor of presenting the awards to his rescuers. Emma and Sarah Martinez and their dog Max represent the very best of what it means to be part of a community, Sheriff Davidson said, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded room. When they saw someone in need, they didn't hesitate to help even though the situation was frightening and dangerous. Their courage and quick thinking saved my life, and I will be grateful to them forever. The formal presentation included certificates of heroism for Emma and Sarah, along with a special medal for Max that was designed to attach to his collar. The golden retriever seemed to understand the importance of the occasion, sitting perfectly still and allowing the medal to be placed around his neck while the crowd applauded. But the most meaningful part of the ceremony came when Sheriff Davidson knelt down to Max's level and spent several minutes simply petting the dog and speaking quietly to him. Everyone in the room understood that a special bond had been formed between the sheriff and the animal who had quite literally been his guardian angel. During his darkest hour, I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, Sheriff Davidson told the crowd, and I've learned that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they wear uniforms, and sometimes they're 12-year-old girls walking their dog on a Saturday morning. But real heroes all have one thing in common. They act when action is needed regardless of the personal cost or risk. The ceremony also recognized the broader community response that had made the rescue successful. Deputy Santos, the paramedics, firefighters, and other emergency personnel were acknowledged for their professional skill and dedication. Even Mr. Miller, who had provided access to his telephone and store, was thanked for his contribution to saving Sheriff Davidson's life. Emma and Sarah were asked to speak about their experience, but both girls remained modest about their role in the rescue. They continued to insist that Max deserved most of the credit, and they emphasized how many different people had worked together to achieve the successful outcome. "We just happened to be in the right place at the right time," Emma told the crowd, but Max was the one who knew something was wrong, and all the emergency workers were the ones who actually saved Sheriff Davidson's life. We just connected them together. The local newspaper coverage of the ceremony was picked up by regional media outlets, and soon the story of the twin girls and their heroic dog was being shared across the state. Television news crews visited Millbrook to interview the Martinez family and film the bridge where the dramatic rescue had taken place. Max seemed to enjoy his newfound celebrity status, posing patiently for photographs and accepting treats from admiring visitors. The golden retriever's natural friendly disposition made him a perfect ambassador for the story, and his photogenic appearance ensured that images of him wearing his hero medal appeared in newspapers and on television screens throughout the region. The attention brought unexpected opportunities for the Martinez family. Animal training organizations reached out to discuss Max's remarkable instincts and behavior. Children's book publishers expressed interest in creating stories based on Max's heroic actions. Even a dog food company offered to feature Max in their advertising campaigns. However, Emma and Sarah's parents were careful to manage the attention in a way that protected their daughter's privacy and normal childhood experiences. They accepted some interviews and appearances, but they also made sure that Emma and Sarah continued to focus on school, friends, and the ordinary activities that 12-year-old girls should enjoy. The most lasting impact of the rescue was the way it changed how the Martinez family thought about courage, community, and the responsibility that comes with being able to help others. Emma and Sarah had learned that extraordinary situations can arise without warning, and that ordinary people can respond in extraordinary ways when the need arises. Sheriff Davidson became a regular visitor to the Martinez household, stopping by periodically to check on his heroes and to bring special treats for Max. The relationship that developed between the sheriff and the family was one of genuine friendship and mutual respect, built on the foundation of a shared experience that none of them would ever forget. The bridge where Sheriff Davidson had fallen and where he had been rescued became a symbol of community spirit in Millbrook. The commemorative plaque installed there read, "In recognition of Emma Martinez, Sarah Martinez, and Max, whose courage and compassion saved a life on this spot. Their actions remind us that heroes live among us, and that one person's willingness to help can make all the difference." As autumn turned to winter and the creek below the bridge slowed to a gentle trickle, life in Millbrook returned to its normal pace. But the story of the twin girls and their dog continued to inspire residents and visitors alike, serving as a reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected forms and that the bonds between humans and animals can lead to remarkable acts of courage and love. Emma, Sarah, and Max continued their weekend walks, though they never again found anything more dramatic than the occasional lost baseball or discarded soda can. But they walked with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing they had faced a real crisis and responded with wisdom, bravery, and compassion. Their ordinary Saturday morning had become an extraordinary chapter in their lives and in the history of their small town, proving that heroes truly can be found anywhere at any time when courage and kindness come together in the service of others.